Hi there. Welcome to session 3 of Self-Care for Frontline Helping Professionals, a mindfulness video series. Once again, this is for anyone who's in the helping profession. It could be teachers, healthcare workers, therapists, anyone out there, nurses, anyone who's out there who's really holding other people right now. And and I do want to just make sure, I know I said this before, I'm really glad you guys are here right now because, right now, this is a tough time, and I want to make sure that you know you're not alone and that we're all in this together. And so just hopefully you could see these videos to know that we're all as helping professionals here together. So today we are going to focus on one of my favorite parts of mindfulness, and it's really talking about non-judgment, self-compassion, and really loving kindness. So I'll get into that a little bit more in a sec. Once again, in case you forgot, my name is Tamra Cajo. I am the director of the Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder Clinic at the Florida Center. And once again, I just adore I just love mindfulness. It's been a really helpful thing for me as a practice. I've been doing this for many years. And so I'm excited that you're here as well, so that you can also be part of this as well, because that's what's so amazing about mindfulness is that it's a gift we can give ourselves. So this is something that you could start doing for yourself. So one thing I have, if anyone knows me, I don't think hardly any of you guys do, but maybe you guys do. I always talk about, first of all, I know in our field, we've seen some really awful things. We've witnessed awful abuse and we've seen people treat each other badly. But the big abuse that we never talk about is really the abuse towards ourselves. So, really, right now, what this is all about is stopping that abuse. Um, I talked about it last week of just this automatic response that we've learned from when we were young. And the crazy thing is, we will just fight tooth and nail to be attached to it. And the reality is, which I had talked about the story of last week of like maybe my mother's judging me when I'm failing. Like my mother has got probably, she's got what her judgment is in fact either. So why am I taking her response as fact when it's not? It's just her emotional reaction to it. But we get so attached. And so, really, what we talk about in mindfulness is really starting to start practicing to disconnect from the judgments and feelings we have, good or bad, about ourselves and about others. It's because what it ends up happening is it impacts our behaviors, it impacts how we live, it makes problems a lot worse. And so, really, when we start looking at things, how do we get into this non-judgmental stance to how we see things? Because we see things as good or bad, liking, disliking, rather than it just is. So, and and that's really just something just so important to remember. Because this isn't about being good or bad. This is just you are. And the reality is sometimes we've thought that like being self-critical or hard on ourselves is something good. That the maybe, and that the harder, we are on ourselves, then maybe that's going to push us to be better at things. But what happens is that the research is showing that you end up becoming, the harder you are on yourselves, the weaker you are in the face of failure. The more emotional you are, the less likely you are to assimilate lessons from failure, and the more likely to have stress and burnout, which really directs, the way you are impacting somebody. So I think about and I'll give I'm always using my examples because I'm the only one in this room right now that I can really hear. Um, that so I moved to Florida just a couple of years ago, and I remember I was working in a school and it was really high stress, and something there was a crisis that happened, and you know I ended up like I there was a crisis that was happening, and I feel like I didn't respond the way I would have wanted to respond. And what I initially felt was, oh my gosh, I'm such a bad worker. I thought I was a better worker. I knew I was a good therapist. Look what I did. I screwed this child up and all of that stuff. So that definitely was not self-compassion. And so I noticed that. And then what are the other words that I ended up saying to myself down the road? Where I then realized the true context of why I didn't do the way I wanted to be doing it. One, it was a brand new job. The rules of dealing with crisis here in Florida is different than when I was in Illinois. So, like when you're dealing with needing to Baker Act someone, it's completely different here than in Illinois. So I wasn't really able, I didn't get to go over all of that the way I wanted to. I wasn't knowing who all the players were. I didn't even know really my boss that well. And to make matters worse, when I came, I was emotionally kind of in a weird place because I was moving into a house and my house was in complete disarray because we were in the middle of just construction. So there was so much going on and I was so, not grounded. So you could see how when I was being so hard on myself, it was hard to learn anything from it. If I stuck with what's wrong with me, I knew I was a better worker. Now the next crisis, I'm coming in with the base of me being a bad worker. So, but and when you started getting back to the facts of something that we talked about the week before of noticing what is, the facts are I was new to Florida. I was new to a new job. School is a very stressful environment. I didn't have a relationship with my boss quite yet. There was all these facts that were going on. And so that's where I needed to go back to the facts in order to have some self-compassion for myself. So really, when I start having self-compassion, that's resiliency. That's helping me to be able to bounce back. Because if we're stuck in a hole and that's who we feel like we deserve, it's really hard to get out. But if I start having compassion towards myself and showing empathy towards myself and loving concern to myself when I'm feeling that difficulty, it's easier to get out of that hole. And that's human nature. And let's be honest, I'm not lying to myself. When I said, hey, you're new to your job, you're new to the state, you're new to this company, you're new to all of this stuff, I wasn't like just sugarcoating, being like, oh, don't you worry, you're a great worker. No, I'm saying this is the facts, and my brain was not working to the optimum functioning. I wasn't saying I was a good worker or a bad worker, but I was stating the facts. And that's where really getting into like self-acceptance. I was not at my prime state in that moment. And so I have to remember that and notice that. But I didn't need that extra judgy thing that was going on. So non-judgmental attitude is really, how do you become non-judgmental towards your inadequacies and failures? How do you treat yourself as you would a friend or a client or a patient? And that's where you think about whenever you start noticing all those negative things you might be saying to yourself, what would you say to a friend? What would you say to your client? What are the things that you're maybe seeing to somebody else that you may not be able to see towards yourself? And going back to self-compassion, how do we start practicing that so that we start learning that? Because let's be honest, we go back to our abuse. And so it's really easy to go back to that criticism. But self-kindness is about ability to refrain from that harsh criticism and just notice it. And that's where you're going to be practicing that day in and day out. So if, let's just say, you're having a mindful moment, you pick 3 minutes that you're like sitting there and breathing, and you notice yourself, starting to have critical thoughts like, man, I'm really bad at this, or, ugh, whatever you're thinking. Can you notice your judgment without judgment? So all I need to do is go. So if, let's just say, I'm having a mindful moment where I'm sitting here quietly and I'm just breathing, and my monkey brain is going all over the place. And then I start judging myself, going, okay, I know I'm so bad at this. Ugh, this is so annoying. Ugh, this is awful. So what do? You go back to the facts. What is the context of what is happening? One, you might be new to mindfulness, which is fine. Two, like I said, we all, of which I had talked about in the previous session, we all have a monkey brain. We all have our brains that like have their mind of their own. They're going everywhere. And three, noticing the facts. Look, I'm sitting here, I'm judging my thoughts, and I'm having my thoughts everywhere. So you're just noticing that without having an opinion one way or another. So that's what really having that non-judgmental stance is all about. And there is research upon research of talking about the more that you have self-compassion, the more that you can be able to do a lot more, because we're kinder, because you can get out of that hole. So this is your homework assignment for this week. And one thing I just want to say, this is a shorter mindfulness series or webinar from the week before. This definitely does not mean that it is less important or is less difficult. In fact, this is so much more difficult because I go back to whatever our mind does comes from how many years that we've had this automatic thought process and feeling process. So your goal is to really start noticing when you start having mean thoughts about yourself, or judgy thoughts, or even actually overly good thoughts about yourself. And when you start going, oh gosh, I'm thinking I'm great, or man, I am number one, or whatever you want to say, or man, I'm really a crappy worker, or I'm a bad wife, or I'm this or that. Just all I'm asking you is to notice you judging, and just all you need to say is, look at my judgy thoughts. Just notice that. And then go back to finding out how can you start being that friend to yourself again. Remember the context. So if, let's just say right now with work, remember to get back to the facts. The facts are, we're dealing with a lot of stress right now. Not only are we dealing with just, we have our whole past life. Remember that we're dealing with, a pandemic. Remember, we're dealing with being a helping professional in a pandemic. Remember that you're also maybe dealing with relationships in your home. Remember that your child might be doing homeschooling. Remember that you are also dealing with other people in your home who are also having their own stresses dealing with this pandemic. Remember that all, so that when you start judging yourself, you're judging that, know that your mind is not working to the best it can be. You're working good enough. And so how do you start being nice to yourself with being good enough? So thank you so much for coming. Once again, we have another webinar next week, May 20th at 1 p.m. And that's really, we're going to be talking about finding an anchor in mindfulness, because our mind's going to be going back to the past and the present, or going past and the future. It has a difficult time being in the present. And also we have a difficult time being kind to ourselves. So once again, we're practicing that. but we want to start having an anchor so that we can stay and do what we need to be doing. And at the end of the webinar next week, we're actually going to practice and have a mindful moment just to kind of put everything together. So thank you again for coming, and I'll see you next week.